They say, history is written by the victors. But what of the stories they dare not write? The tales too strange, too grotesque, too true to be believed. Tonight I lead you into the hidden catacombs of Europe's forgotten centuries, to a court trial not against a man or a woman, but against something carved in silence, something that spoke when it should not have. The year was 1491. The last echoes of the Black Death had long faded. But the air across southern France still clung to a scent of rot and reverence. In the village of Saint-Benoît, perched on a jagged hill like a crow watching over the valley, there stood a monastery known as l'Abbey Day, murmurs the Abbey of Whispers. It was a place where monks did not chant, but listened, where prayers were not offered, but heard. And deep in its candlelit sanctuary stood a statue unlike any other. It was not large, no more than the size of a small child, hewn from ash-gray stone and veined like flesh. It depicted a robed figure with no face, just a smooth oval surface where features should have been. The monks called it l'enfant, to silence the child of silence. It had no known sculptor, no inscription, no origin. But the records buried beneath vellum and blood say it had one terrible gift. It spoke. Brother Matthew was the first to hear it. A quiet, reclusive monk, known for translating apocryphal texts and rarely lifting his eyes from scripture. He claimed it whispered to him in Latin, softly at first, as if repeating his prayers back to him. But soon, it began to answer before he even spoke. When confronted by the abbot, Matthew trembled like a man cursed, insisting he had not imagined it, that the statue had warned him of a fire in the granary. 2 nights later, the fire came. 4 monks died, their skin melted into the stone floor. Only then did they begin to wonder, was this truly a miracle, or something far older? Word spread beyond the cloister walls. Pilgrims began to arrive, not in prayer, but desperation. Mothers begged it to find their lost sons. Merchants offered gold in exchange for answers, and always the statue remained still, except when it chose otherwise. The church sent investigators, of course. Among them, a young Dominican inquisitor named Henry de Valmont. At 27, he had already overseen 3 witch trials and a heresy purge in Flanders. But what he found in Saint-Benoît shook even his iron faith. He described in his private journal how the statue spoke not only in Latin, but in tongues he had never heard, languages that made his ears bleed, his dreams warp. He heard it say his brother's name, who had drowned at sea 15 years prior, told him what the body looked like now, beneath the waves. Valmont wrote, "It does not speak to the mind. It speaks to the part of us that remembers before birth, knows things no mouth should know." He urged the church to destroy it, but by then it was too late. A nobleman from Arles, whose name was erased from all surviving records, donated a sum large enough to have the statue moved into a private chapel. There, a strange sect formed, part monastic, part fanatical. They called themselves Les Disciples du Silence. They believed the statue to be not a tool of the devil, but the voice of the forgotten God, the first word before the world began. It was in this chapel, amidst velvet curtains and ash-filled incense, that the murders began. The first was a scribe, found with his tongue torn out and placed delicately in his own inkwell. The second, a nun whose ears were sliced open and sewn shut with golden thread. And always, always, the statue remained at the center, unmoved, unblinking, unworshipped in the traditional sense, but feared like a thunderstorm carved in stone. In 1494, a papal edict was issued in secrecy. The contents are still debated, but all copies but one were burned. That one lies today in a vault beneath a vignon and contains a single chilling sentence. Non est homo.
Non est.
Demonium. Est inter verba. It is not man. It is not demon. It is between words. And so, in the dead of winter, the trial was called. A court was assembled not in daylight, but under the cover of night, inside the abbey where it all began. Witnesses were summoned, a prosecutor appointed, and most astonishing of all, a defense was granted. They would try the statue as one might try a man, for crimes against the natural order, for heresy, for murder, for the corruption of the soul through speech, and the one who would defend it was the last person anyone expected. Her name was Isabel de Roquefort, the daughter of a disgraced bishop and a mother who died in childbirth. Isabel was raised not with lullabies, but with parchment and law. At 16, she had memorized the entire Codex Justinianus. By 20, she had won a secret annulment trial between two cardinals. And by 23, she vanished into the labyrinthine underworld of papal politics, reappearing only when summoned for the impossible. Why she accepted the role of defending El Infante's silence remains one of history's unanswered questions. Some claimed she had once heard the statue herself and never recovered. Others believed she sought redemption for a sin so great it had no name. But when she arrived at Saint-Benoît on the 3rd of February, 1495, she brought with her no scrolls, no assistants, no cross, to clutch only a small leather book bound shut with a silver clasp, and eyes that looked like they had already seen the verdict. The courtroom of Juan could call it, that had been carved hastily into the abbey's undercroft. A place once used to store wine, now reeking of damp earth and incense. Torches crackled along the stone walls, casting shadows that danced like witnesses of their own. Seated in silence were 7 judges, bishops, abbots, and a single lay lord, whose hands shook beneath his velvet gloves. A choir of monks stood along the edges, not to sing, but to transcribe. Every breath would be recorded. The prosecutor was Father Anselm, a zealot with a voice like broken bells. He laid out the charges in a voice that quivered with conviction. The object in question, this sculpture, whose affront to creation has corrupted minds, caused death, and dares to imitate the holy gift of language, which belongs only to man and to God. We charge it with heresy, with murder, blasphemy against the natural tongue. And then Isabel stood. No opening plea, no preamble, just a sentence that chilled the marrow of every spine in the room. Has it spoken to any of you? Silence, and then a murmur. She continued, slowly circling the statue where it stood at the center of the chamber. It looked the same as Evergrey, faceless, hands folded in its lap like a child awaiting a scolding. But the air around it felt wrong, thick, like a confession before it's spoken. You fear it because it does not lie. That is the root of your terror. Anselm objected immediately. Isabel ignored him. You have heard its voice in your sleep. It does not ask, it does not command, and it reveals. That is its crime, is it not? It knows the things we bury, the thoughts we lock behind rosaries and titles and robes. She turned to the judges, gaze unwavering. If this is heresy, then truth itself is heresy. It was then that the statue moved, not a gesture, not a twitch, but the air itself shifted. The torches dimmed not by wind, but by presence. A scent like petrichor and burning hair filled the space. And then it spoke, but not aloud. The monks dropped their quills. One collapsed in seizure. Judge clutched his face and screamed, blood pouring from his eyes. Voice, if it could be called, that tentered every mind differently. For some, it was their mother's lullaby, warped and reversed. For others, it was their own voice, saying things they had never dared admit. And for Isabel, ... it said her name. Not Isabel, but her birth name. The one given before her baptism. A name that had never been written. She staggered back. Do you see now? Anselm roared. It is not of God. It is a mirror held to our rot. But Isabel, trembling, raised a single finger. If it is a mirror, then who placed it here? That night, 4 more monks fled the abbey, to hang themselves by dawn. The trial paused for a day. In the privacy of her cell, Isabel opened the leather book. Inside were drawings not of laws, not of people, but of mouths. Dozens, hundreds of mouths, each drawn in black ink. Some with tongues, some sewn shut, some screaming silently. It was said she had drawn them in her youth, when the voices first began. The next morning, she did not speak a word. Instead, she placed the book at the feet of the statue and waited. The statue did not move, but when the court reconvened, a single page had been torn from the book and written upon it. In ink no one could identify, was a sentence that none of the judges ever dared read aloud. And when she did, the walls wept. No one, not even Isabel herself, could recall the exact words she read that day. The sentence vanished as soon as it was spoken, like breath on a mirror. But those present described what followed as something between a miracle and a curse. The walls of the undercroft darkened not black, but red. A deep, arterial red, as if the stone itself remembered blood. From the ceiling, droplets formed thick as syrup and fell soundlessly onto the floor. Not water, not wax, something older. The monks recorded it as lacrima memoria, the tears of memory. The statue smiled, not physically. Its face remained smooth and empty. But those who looked at it swore they saw the curve of lips, the suggestion of teeth behind stone. One judge sobbed and confessed to murdering his illegitimate son 20 years prior. Another tore off his robes and screamed that God had never spoken to him, not once, not ever. By nightfall, 3 witnesses had recanted their testimony. One fled into the forest and was never seen again. The church ordered the trial to continue. But what was unfolding in Saint-Benoît was no longer a courtroom. It was a confession booth for all of Christendom. And Isabel, once a woman of logic and law, was becoming something else entirely. She no longer argued with Anselm. She no longer referenced canon or scripture. Instead, she began each morning by sitting before the statue and whispering. Not questions, not pleas, just truths. Fragments of memories, pieces of herself. And each time, the statue remained still, but she would return with new knowledge. The kind one should not have. She began citing details about the judges' private lives. Wounds they had never shared. One Bishop Francois of Lyon refused to enter the chamber after she named the exact words. His father spoke before hanging himself in 1467. Isabel was not threatening them. She was becoming them. She wore their shame like a cloak. Anselm, meanwhile, descended into paranoia. He had always been a man fueled by righteousness, but now he was crumbling beneath the weight of a trial he could not understand. He began accusing the statue not only of speech, but of seduction. Called it a mouth without a soul, a serpent carved in stone, brought in relics, splashing it with holy water, burning incense, reciting exorcisms. None of it worked. In fact, the more he fought, the louder the silences became. One night he was found kneeling before the statue, whispering something in Greek, a language he did not speak. His hands were covered in ink, though no inkpot was nearby. When asked what he had said, he wept and replied, "I asked it who I am," it answered. The next day he requested to resign as prosecutor. The request was denied. The trial was nearing its end. Only one matter remained, sentencing. But how does one sentence a statue to be broken, to be buried, to be silenced, when silence is its very nature? The judges were divided. Some wished to have it shattered, ground into dust, and scattered in the rain. Others proposed sealing it beneath the abbey, never to be seen again. But Isabel proposed something else. Let it speak. The room fell cold. You have accused it of deception, of corruption, of sin, but it has never once testified. You claim it speaks heresy. Then let it speak for itself. It was unthinkable. To give voice to an object, to ask it to defend its own existence, was not just heresy, it was blasphemy beyond articulation. But none of the judges dared oppose her, because by now, they had all heard it too. So a date was set, February 22nd, 1495, the final day of the trial. The day the statue would speak, not in secrets, not in dreams, but in front of them all. Words spread like fire through parchment. Nobles arrived in the night, scholars, madmen, pilgrims. They packed the abbey like insects in amber. And when the hour came, the room fell so silent, one could hear breath against wool. And Isabel, now gaunt and ghost-pale, stepped forward. She placed her hand on the statue's shoulder, though it burned her skin to do so, and whispered just one word, "Why?" And for the first time, the statue answered aloud. Its voice was unlike anything ever recorded. Not loud, yet it echoed through every ribcage like thunder inside bone. Not a voice of a man, nor God, nor even an animal. It was origin. It was the sound language made before vowels were born. And it spoke not in Latin nor French, but in a tongue every soul understood. Because you carved me to remember what you refused to. The room shuddered. A crack split across the floor. One of the judges vomited blood. Anselm, poor, shattered Anselm, fell to his knees, laughing and sobbing as he tore at his own face. Isabel collapsed. Not from fear, but from revelation. The truth was this: the statue had never been made to protect. It had never been meant to inspire. It had been carved for something that was once human. The trial ended not with a verdict, but with silence. A silence so absolute, it choked even the birds outside. The torches went out one by one, not from wind, but as if the air itself no longer wished to bear witness. The witnesses, the judges, the monks, the nobles who had crept in with their questions all left Saint-Benoît with the same expression. The face of someone who had seen the truth and wished they hadn't. But Isabel remained. They say she did not speak for 3 days. Shh. Not to the monks, not to the church delegates, not even to herself. She sat at the foot of the statue, hair undone, eyes hollowed out like tunnels through time. When asked what the voice meant, "You carved me to remember what you refused to," she simply answered, "It was one of us." What followed has been pieced together only through fragmented letters, half-burned confessions, and the last entries of Isabel's journal, found hidden beneath a floorboard years later. Written in a mixture of Latin, Occitan, and a third language no scholar has yet been able to identify. According to those pages, the statue had once been a man, not a saint, not a sinner, but a scribe. A chronicler from the time before the plague, who saw the beginnings of horrors that no church dared record, rituals held in the dead forests of Aquitaine. Tongues spoken backward at dusk, kings whispering to bones. This scribe whose name had been erased tried to document it all. Every blasphemy, every unholy vow, every truth people refused to see. But truth, when written, becomes dangerous. They captured him. They did not kill him. That would have been mercy. Instead, they bound his body and soul into stone, carving his knowledge into the very grain of his prison. His mouth was sealed, yet his memory remained. A monument not of piety, but of warning. A warning we forgot, until it began to speak. When Isabel uncovered this, she wept not out of fear, but recognition, because she too had once tried to speak the truth. It's about a cardinal who trafficked children through confessional booths. About letters exchanged between abbots and warlords. Warnings were dismissed, her family shamed, her silence bought, but she had buried it all. And now, the statue had unearthed it. On March 1st, under orders from the papal emissary, the church declared l'enfant de silence an object of anathema, was to be sealed inside a reliquary forged from blessed lead, chained with silver links, inscribed with psalms, and buried beneath the abbey, deeper than bone, deeper than breath. The monks who performed the ritual died within a year, each one speechless at death. Isabel was not present at the burial. She vanished the night before, leaving behind only her journal and a single page torn from her leather book. It showed the statue, still and silent as ever. But this time, a faint crack ran across its torso, and inside, barely visible, was the shape of a second mouth. Her final journal entry read, "They silenced it once by turning it to stone. But stone remembers. And now, I carry the rest." She was never seen again. Decades later, the abbey burned to the ground in a fire with no source. The cellar was never found. But there were rumors that beneath the ruins, in the earth that pulsed like a buried heartbeat, there still sat something that whispered through the dirt. In 1902, a team of French archaeologists attempted to excavate the site. They uncovered shattered chalices, burnt pews, and a pit lined with melted silver. At the center was a lead box, warped from heat and empty. Nothing has been recovered since. But there are reports. A child in Marseille who claims a statue spoke to her in a dream. A librarian in Prague who woke with ink-stained hands and drawings of mouths she didn't remember sketching. A courtroom in Rome where, during a corruption hearing, every microphone failed at the same moment. And yet a single voice echoed on the tape recorder. They say the voice said only one thing: "Vous vous souvenez maintenant." You remember now? So when you walk past a statue that seems to still, or find yourself whispering secrets with no one to hear, ask yourself, who carved it and why? Because perhaps some things were never meant to be forgotten, only buried.